Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the stars through the main window. The ship had been traveling for 3 months to reach this empty part of space. His crew was tired but excited. They were here to find something that had been sending signals across the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Dr. Lisa Parker sat at her science station and checked her readings again. She was the best alien life expert that Earth had. Her job was to study any strange life forms they might find. The signal they were chasing was not like anything humans had ever heard before. It was old and sad, and seemed to be calling for help. Tony. Blake worked at the communications desk. He was young but very good with radio signals and computer codes. For weeks he had been trying to understand the alien message. Parts of it were clear, but most of it was still a mystery. The signal came from somewhere near a dead star that had stopped shining long ago. Jake walked over to Tony and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. Tony looked up with tired eyes. He had been working on the signal for 18 hours straight and had not slept. Jake could see that Tony was close to something important. The signal suddenly got much stronger. All the computers on the ship started beeping at the same time. Lisa jumped up from her chair and ran to the big window. What she saw made her gasp. There was something huge floating in space near the dead star. It was bigger than any ship humans had ever built. The thing was dark and covered with strange markings that seemed to glow with a weak light. Jake ordered the ship to move closer but stay at a safe distance. As they got nearer, the alien structure became even more amazing. It was not a ship at all, but some kind of space station or monument. The thing was made of a metal that looked like it could last forever. Strange symbols covered every surface, and they seemed to tell a story. Tony worked harder to decode the signal. His fingers moved fast over his keyboard as he tried different computer programs. Suddenly he stopped and his face went white. He looked at Jake with scared eyes and pointed at his screen. The message was now clear enough to read. The alien words had been translated into human language. The message said that something terrible was coming. A race of creatures called the Devourers had destroyed the aliens who built this warning station. These Devourers ate all life on every planet they found. They moved from star to star like a plague that could never be stopped. Lisa read the message over Tony's shoulder. Her hands started to shake as she understood what it meant. The aliens who sent this warning were called the Vorthak. They had been a peaceful people who loved art and science, but the Devourers had found their world and consumed everything living on it. The Vorthak had used their last days to build this warning beacon. The message contained star maps and dates. Jake studied them with growing fear. The Devourers moved in a straight line across the galaxy. They had been traveling for thousands of years and eating every world in their path. According to the Vorthak calculations, the Devourers would reach Earth in about 18 months. Tony found more files hidden in the alien computer system. These files contained images of the Devourers and their ships. The creatures looked like giant insects but with metal parts attached to their bodies. Their ships were alive somehow and could repair themselves. Each ship was as big as a city and carried millions of the hungry creatures. The Vorthak had tried to fight the Devourers with their best weapons and strongest ships. Nothing had worked. The Devourers just kept coming and eating and growing stronger. The only thing that slowed them down was when they found worlds with no life on them. They would scan these dead planets quickly and move on to find better food. Lisa found records of other alien races in the Vorthak files. Dozens of civilizations had been eaten by the Devourers. Some had tried to run away to other galaxies. Others had tried to hide underground or in space stations. A few had tried to make their planets look dead. Most of these tricks had failed, but a few planets had been passed by when the Devourers thought they were empty. Jake knew they had to get this information back to Earth as fast as possible. He ordered the crew to copy everything from the alien computer. They worked for 2 days to download all the files and images. The warning beacon had been waiting for 1,000 years for someone to find it and carry its message to other worlds. As the New Horizon prepared to leave, Jake took one last look at the ancient monument. The Vorthak had used their final moments of life to warn others about the coming danger. They had died hoping that their message would save other worlds from the same terrible fate. The journey back to Earth would take 2 months. During that time, Jake and his crew studied every piece of information they had found. The more they learned about the Devourers, the more hopeless their situation seemed. Earth had the strongest military in human space, but it was nothing compared to the force that was coming. Tony sent emergency messages ahead to Earth, but Jake knew that words alone would not be enough. People would need to see the proof with their own eyes. They would need to understand that this was not some distant threat, but something that would arrive very soon. Lisa spent her time studying how other worlds had tried to survive. Most had failed, but a few had found ways to trick the Devourers. The key seemed to be making a planet look completely lifeless. This was almost impossible to do, but it was the only thing that had ever worked. As Earth grew larger in their window, Jake wondered if his home planet would still exist in 2 years. The Devourers had never failed to find and consume a living world. Humanity would have to do something that no other race had managed to do. They would have to disappear completely while staying alive. President Helen Carter sat in the big meeting room with leaders from every nation on Earth. The room was quiet as Jake Morrison finished telling them about the Devourers. Nobody wanted to believe what they had just heard, but the proof was right. There on the screens around them, images of destroyed worlds and the hungry alien creatures filled every display. General Rick Sullivan stood up and walked to the front of the room. He was a tall man with gray hair who had fought in many wars. His job was to protect Earth from any enemy, but he had never faced anything like this before. Rick looked at the information about Devourer ships and shook his head. Even if every nation worked together, their combined armies would not be strong enough. The general pointed at the star maps that showed the path of destruction across the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds had been consumed and turned into empty rocks floating in space. The Devourers had never been stopped or even slowed down by any military force. Every race that tried to fight them had been eaten. Dr. Alan Cross raised his hand to speak. He was the smartest scientist on Earth and had spent his life working with new kinds of technology. Alan had been studying the Vorthak files for weeks since Jake brought them back. He believed there might be another way to survive that did not involve fighting. Alan walked to the center of the room and activated a hologram projector. The image showed Earth from space, but something was different about it. The planet looked gray and lifeless with no lights from cities and no signs of activity. Alan explained that this was his plan to save humanity from the Devourers. The plan was called Project Silent Dawn, and it was the most difficult thing humans had ever attempted. Every person on Earth would have to disappear underground while making. The planet looked completely dead from space. New technology would hide all heat signatures and electromagnetic signals. The oceans would be covered with special materials to make them look empty of life. Helen Carter asked how long it would take to build everything they needed. Alan said they had about 15 months to construct underground cities for 8 billion people. They would also need to build machines that could fake the appearance of a dead world. It seemed impossible, but it was their only chance. The meeting continued for 3 days as leaders argued about the plan. Some wanted to build more weapons and fight the aliens in space. Others thought they should try to escape to distant planets in other solar systems. A few believed they should send messages to the Devourers and try to make peace. Dr. Kate Young was an expert on ocean life and animals. She stood up and explained why running away would not work. The Devourers moved faster than any human ship could travel. They would catch any escape fleet long before it reached safety. As for making peace, Kate showed images of what happened to planets that tried to surrender. The Devourers did not talk or negotiate. They only consumed. Construction began immediately, after the vote was taken. Every factory on Earth stopped making normal products and started building equipment for the underground cities. Millions of workers dug tunnels and chambers beneath major cities. The work continued day and night as huge machines carved out spaces big enough to hold entire populations. The hardest part was making Earth look dead, while keeping everyone alive underground. Special air systems had to be built to provide oxygen, without creating any heat that alien scanners could detect. Food would have to be grown in hidden chambers using artificial light. Water systems had to be completely sealed off from the surface. Kate Young led the effort to save Earth's animals and plants. Thousands of species had to be moved to underground habitats. Seeds and genetic samples were stored in frozen vaults. The forests and grasslands on the surface would be treated with chemicals to make them look brown and lifeless. People around the world worked together like never before. Nations that had been enemies for centuries shared technology and resources. Everyone understood that humanity would either survive together or die together. There was no time for old arguments or territorial disputes. Families said goodbye to their homes and prepared to live underground for years. Children asked their parents when they would see the sun again, but nobody knew the answer. Schools were built in the tunnels, so education could continue. Libraries and museums were moved below ground to preserve human culture. The quantum masking technology was the most complex part of the project. Dr. Alan Cross worked with teams of physicists to build machines that could bend light and radio waves around the planet. These devices would make Earth invisible to most types of alien scanners. The technology had never been tested on such a large scale. Problems appeared everywhere as the deadline approached. Some tunnel systems flooded with underground water. Power generators broke down from constant use. Computer networks crashed under the load of coordinating the massive project. Each crisis had to be solved quickly because there was no time for delays. Religious leaders held special services to calm people's fears. Many believed this was the end of the world, while others saw it as a test of human strength. Churches and temples were built in the underground cities. People needed hope to survive what was coming. As the months passed, the surface of Earth began to change. Cities were abandoned and lights were turned off. Roads cracked and weeds grew through the concrete. Rivers were diverted underground and lakes were drained. From space, the planet started to look like it had been dead for many years. The last. Families moved underground 3 weeks before the Devourers were expected to arrive. Jake Morrison stood in one of the deepest command centers and watched the final preparations. Cameras on the surface showed a world that looked empty and forgotten. The transformation was complete, but nobody knew if it would be enough. Helen Carter made a final speech to the people of Earth. She promised that humanity would survive this test and return to the surface stronger than before. The underground cities were not just hiding places, but the foundation of a new civilization. When the Devourers left, Earth would be reborn. The quantum masking system activated for the first time on a planetary scale. Every human settlement disappeared. From alien detection methods, Earth looked like a rock that had never known life. The greatest magic trick in history was ready, and the audience was coming fast. Commander Steve Hughes sat in the deepest bunker beneath what used to be New York City. The walls around him were 3 miles underground and made of the strongest materials humans could build. Above his head, 8 million people lived in tunnels and chambers carved from solid rock. Everyone was waiting and trying not to make any sound that might give them away. The alien ships had arrived 2 days ago. Steve watched them on screens connected to hidden cameras placed around the solar system. The Devourer fleet was bigger than anything the Vorthak records had described. Hundreds of living ships, each the size of a continent, moved through space like enormous fish swimming through dark water. The first ship to reach Earth was a scout vessel, but even it was larger than the biggest human city. Its surface was covered with organic material that pulsed and moved like skin. Strange openings appeared and closed along its sides as it scanned the planet below. Steve could see smaller creatures moving around inside these holes like insects in a hive. Dr. Amy Foster sat next to Steve and monitored the psychological reports from all the underground cities. People were terrified, but so far everyone was following the silence protocols. No radio signals were being transmitted and no heat was escaping to the surface. The quantum masking system was working perfectly, but Amy worried about how long people could live in constant fear. The Devourer scout ship moved closer to Earth and began detailed scans of the planet's surface. Its sensors swept across continents looking for any sign of life. The artificial dead forests and empty cities appeared exactly as planned. Rivers looked stagnant and polluted. The atmosphere showed no traces of industrial activity or biological processes. Paul Davis worked frantically in the engineering section as problems developed with the masking system. The quantum generators were overheating from the strain of hiding an entire planet. If even one of them failed, the Devourers would detect the massive human population hiding below ground. Paul and his team had to keep the machines running while making no noise that could be heard above. More Devourer ships arrived and spread out across the solar system. They seemed confused by what they found. According to their scans, Earth was completely lifeless, but something about it did not seem right. The planet showed signs of having once supported life, but now appeared to have been dead for centuries. Steve watched as one of the larger Devourer vessels approached the moon. The ship extended tentacle-like appendages that burrowed into the lunar surface. It was testing the soil and rocks for traces of biological material. The creatures were very thorough in their search for food and would not give up easily. Underground, the children were having the hardest time staying quiet. Teachers like Mary Johnson tried to keep them calm with silent games and activities. Books were read without speaking aloud. Meals were eaten without the usual chatter of family conversation. The youngest children did not understand why they could not play normally. The Devourers spent their first week on Earth scanning every continent. Their ships moved slowly across the surface using different types of sensors. They checked the ocean floors and probed deep into mountain ranges. Each scan came back negative for life, but the aliens continued searching with growing frustration. Paul Davis discovered that the quantum masking was creating unexpected side effects. The planet's magnetic field was being altered in ways that could be detected by sensitive instruments. He had to adjust the system constantly to prevent these anomalies from being noticed. Every change he made risked exposing the hidden population. A crisis developed when one of the Devourer ships landed near the former location of London. The alien vessel began drilling into the ground directly above one of the largest underground cities. Steve watched in horror as the drill came closer and closer to the inhabited tunnels. If it broke through, the masking field would collapse and millions of people would be discovered. Emergency teams led by engineer Linda Ross worked to evacuate the threatened sections. 200,000 people had to be moved through narrow tunnels to other parts of the underground complex. The evacuation had to be done in complete silence, while the alien drill continued boring toward them. Every footstep and whisper could mean death for everyone. The drill stopped just 50 feet above the city. The Devourers had found nothing but solid rock and decided to try another location. Steve and his team watched as the alien ship lifted, off and moved to a different continent. The narrow escape left everyone shaking with fear, but also more determined to remain hidden. Days turned into weeks as the Devourers continued their search. Their ships visited every major landmass and scanned the depths of every ocean. They seemed to be looking for something specific but could not find it on the apparently dead world. The aliens began to show signs of impatience as their biological needs demanded fresh food. Dr. Amy Foster noticed that people in the underground cities were starting to break down mentally. The constant fear and darkness was too much for some to handle. Counselors worked around the clock to help people cope with the stress. Meditation and exercise programs were organized to keep minds and bodies healthy during the long wait. The Devourers finally seemed ready to leave after 5 weeks of searching. Their ships began gathering in orbit above Earth as if preparing to depart for more promising hunting grounds. Steve allowed himself to hope that the plan had worked and humanity would soon be safe. But then something changed. A massive ship appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was 10 times larger than any vessel they had seen before, and appeared to be some kind of command ship. The smaller Devourer vessels immediately moved to surround it in a protective formation. New scans began, immediately with equipment far more advanced than what the scouts had used. The command ship's sensors penetrated deeper into the Earth and analyzed materials at the molecular level. Steve realized that this final test would determine whether humanity lived or died. The quantum masking system had fooled the scouts, but this new threat might be too powerful to deceive. Paul Davis pushed the masking generators to their absolute limits. The machines began to smoke and spark from the strain, but they held together. Underground cities across the planet went to maximum silence protocols. Even breathing had to be controlled to avoid creating detectable vibrations. The command ship spent 3 days conducting its analysis. Every hour felt like a lifetime as 8 billion people waited in the darkness. Children slept in their parents' arms, while adults prayed to whatever gods they believed in. The future of the human race. depended on technology that had never been tested and the ability of an entire species to remain perfectly quiet. Finally, the scans ended. The command ship transmitted something to the smaller vessels and the entire fleet began moving away from Earth. Steve watched as the Devourer ships disappeared into deep space, leaving only a few scout vessels behind. These remaining ships took up positions around Mars and appeared to be establishing some kind of monitoring post. Humanity had passed the test, but they were not yet free. The scouts would watch the solar system and report any signs of life. Earth would have to remain silent, for as long as the Devourers maintained their vigil. The underground cities that were meant to be temporary shelters had become permanent homes. 5 long years had passed since the Devourers first came to Earth. Mary Johnson stood in front of her classroom 3 miles beneath the surface and looked at faces that had never seen sunlight. These children had been born in the underground cities and knew nothing about the world above. She tried to teach them about trees and birds and blue skies, but the words seemed like fairy tales. The hidden cities had grown into a complete civilization. People had jobs and families and lived normal lives except for the constant silence that governed everything they did. Markets sold food grown in artificial light. Factories produced goods needed for underground living. Schools and hospitals served populations that officially did not exist. Dr. Carl Ross worked in the deepest laboratories studying the quantum masking system that kept humanity hidden. His job was to maintain the machines that made Earth appear lifeless to alien sensors. Carl had discovered something troubling in his recent tests. The masking technology was slowly poisoning the planet's core systems. The quantum fields that hid human activity were interfering with Earth's natural magnetic field. Deep ocean currents were changing direction. The planet's rotation was becoming unstable by tiny amounts that grew larger each month. If the masking continued for much longer, Earth would become truly uninhabitable, even after the Devourers left. Carl brought his findings to the council that governed the underground civilization. President Helen Carter was now an old woman but still led with determination. She listened to Carl's report with growing concern. They had saved humanity from alien consumption only to slowly destroy their home planet with the very technology that protected them. The Devourer scouts still maintained their watch from Mars. Nina Brooks monitored their communications from a hidden station filled with alien technology taken from the Vorthak beacon. The creatures sent regular reports to their main fleet, which had moved on to consume other worlds. Earth remained under observation, but was considered a dead system of no interest. Nina had learned to understand some of the Devourer language during her years of listening. Their recent messages contained disturbing news. The main fleet was planning to return to this sector and establish a permanent base. Earth's solar system would become a staging area for attacks on nearby star systems. Thousands of Devourer ships would soon fill local space. A resistance movement had formed among the younger people in the underground cities. They were led by Ben Clark, who had been an astronaut before the invasion. Ben argued that humanity should emerge from hiding and fight the aliens while they were still weak. 5 years of studying captured Devourer technology had revealed potential weaknesses in their ships and weapons. Ben's followers believed that surprise attacks could destroy the scout vessels before they could warn the main fleet. Earth's military had been rebuilt in secret using advanced materials and energy weapons. Hidden factories produced ships and weapons that were better than anything humans had possessed before the invasion. The conservative faction was led by director Ron Price, who insisted that continued hiding was the only safe option. Ron pointed out that the Devourers had never been defeated in thousands of years of conquest. Any attempt to fight them would result in the discovery and consumption of the entire human race. Arguments between the two groups grew more heated as time passed. Young people who had spent their entire lives underground wanted to see the surface world. Parents who remembered the terror of the invasion refused to risk their children's lives. Families were torn apart by disagreements about humanity's future. Sophie Green was a brilliant young engineer who had grown up in the underground cities. She spent her time studying every piece of information about the Devourers that had been collected over the years. Sophie noticed patterns in their behavior that older scientists had missed. The Devourers always avoided certain types of worlds during their conquest campaigns. Planets that showed signs of ancient battles or mysterious disappearances were passed by quickly. The aliens seemed to fear something about these silent worlds, but nobody had ever understood what that something was. Sophie discovered references in the oldest Vorthak files to an ancient war that had happened millions of years ago. Long before the Devourers became the dominant force in the galaxy, they had fought against an enemy that used stealth and deception as weapons. This unknown race had been able to appear and disappear at will, making entire fleets vanish without a trace. The Devourers had eventually won that ancient war, but they still carried genetic memories of fear about silent enemies. Worlds that reminded them of their old foes were avoided whenever possible. The aliens preferred to attack obvious targets rather than investigate potentially dangerous mysteries. Sophie realized that Earth's successful deception had triggered these ancient fears. The Devourers suspected that their old enemy might have returned, but they were too afraid to investigate properly. Instead, they maintained distant watchposts and avoided direct contact with the seemingly dead world. This discovery changed everything about humanity's situation. They were not just hiding from the Devourers, but had accidentally convinced them that Earth was protected by their most feared ancient enemy. The aliens would never attempt a full invasion as long as they believed the planet might be a trap. Sophie brought her findings to both factions in the human government. Ben Clark saw this as proof that humanity could fight and win against the aliens. The Devourers were afraid, which meant they could be defeated. Ron Price argued that the fear would only last as long as Earth remained mysterious. Any aggressive action would prove that humans were not the ancient enemy. The debate was interrupted by urgent news from Nina Brooks. Her monitoring station had intercepted communications between the Mars Scouts and the main Devourer fleet. Massive armada was approaching the solar system with plans to establish a permanent colony. Hundreds of ships carrying billions of hungry aliens would arrive within 6 months. The underground cities began preparing for the worst. Food production was increased and deeper shelters were constructed. The quantum masking system was upgraded to handle the increased scrutiny that would come with a larger alien presence. Everyone hoped that the ancient fears would be enough to keep the Devourers away from Earth itself. Carl Ross worked desperately to solve the problems with the masking technology. The planet's core systems were failing faster as more power was needed to hide from the approaching fleet. Earth had perhaps 2 more years before the masking either collapsed completely or destroyed the world it was meant to protect. Mary Johnson continued teaching her students about the surface world they might never see. The children drew pictures of sunshine and rain based on descriptions in old books. They sang songs about birds and flowers in whispers that could barely be heard. Some of them asked if the sky was real or just another story adults told. The 5th anniversary of the invasion passed quietly in the underground cities. Memorial services honored those who had died during the construction of the shelters. Speeches celebrated humanity's survival against impossible odds, but everyone knew that the hardest test was still coming. As the Devourer fleet grew closer, Sophie Green prepared to present a new plan to the human government. Her idea would either save the world or destroy it completely. She had found a way to use the aliens' ancient fears against them, but it would require the most dangerous gamble in human history. The time for hiding was almost over. Humanity would soon have to choose between revealing themselves as the planet slowly died or remaining hidden while millions of enemies made Earth their home. Either choice could mean extinction, but doing nothing was no longer an option. Sophie Green stood before the emergency council as the Devourer fleet approached Earth. Her plan was so dangerous that many people called it insane, but it was the only option left. Instead of hiding or fighting, humanity would reveal itself in a way that would terrify the aliens more than any weapon could. The plan was based on the Devourer's ancient fear of their mysterious enemy. Sophie wanted to make first contact with the alien scouts, but do it in a way that convinced them the old foe had returned. Earth would appear to be protected by the same forces that had once nearly destroyed the Devourer civilization millions of years ago. Captain Laura King volunteered to lead the first surface mission in 5 years. She had been a fighter pilot before the invasion and was brave enough for the most dangerous job in human history. Laura would take a small team to the surface and allow themselves to be discovered by the Devourer scouts on Mars. The key to the plan was timing and presentation. The surface team would appear suddenly using technology that seemed impossible even to advanced aliens. They would demonstrate the ability to vanish and reappear at will, just like the Devourer's ancient enemy had done. Then they would disappear again, leaving the aliens with more questions than answers. Commander Pete Williams prepared the global communication system for the most important broadcast in human history. When the time was right, Earth would send a message across the galaxy using captured Devourer technology. The message would announce that the silent worlds were no longer silent, and that the galaxy's age of fear was ending. Dr. Carl Ross worked frantically to modify the quantum masking system for its new role. Instead of hiding the entire planet, the technology would be used to make small teams appear and disappear instantly. The effect would look like magic to observers, but was really just advanced science used in a completely new way. Laura King and her team spent weeks training for their mission. They practiced appearing from nothing and vanishing again in seconds. The quantum technology created brief tears in space that allowed near instantaneous movement across vast distances. The effect was spectacular and would convince any observer that supernatural forces were involved. The Devourer main fleet arrived and began establishing their base throughout the solar system. Massive ships took positions near Jupiter and Saturn, while smaller vessels spread out to guard important locations. The fleet contained over 2,000 ships and billions of hungry aliens ready to consume any life they found. The Mars scouts immediately reported the arrival of the main fleet to their commanders. Earth remained under observation but showed no signs of life after 5 years of monitoring. The planet was classified as a dead world, suitable only for mining operations after more important conquests were completed. Sophie Green gave the final signal, and Laura King's team materialized on the surface of Earth directly in front of the main Devourer observation post on Mars. The aliens' sensors immediately detected the human presence, but could not understand how they had appeared from nowhere. The quantum technology created energy signatures that matched descriptions of the ancient enemy's weapons. Laura spoke directly to the alien scouts using their own language. She told them that Earth had been sleeping but was now awake. The Guardians of the Silent Worlds had returned and would no longer allow the Devourers to consume innocent civilizations. Her words were chosen carefully to trigger maximum fear and confusion. The human team demonstrated their abilities by vanishing and reappearing in multiple locations around the solar system. They seemed to be everywhere at once using technology that defied the Devourer's understanding of physics. Each appearance was brief but long enough to deliver a message of warning to the alien fleet. Panic spread through the Devourer ships as reports of the mysterious contacts reached their commanders. Ancient genetic memories of terror awakened in creatures that had never known fear. The enemy they thought was extinct had returned to challenge them again. Fleet commanders ordered immediate defensive formations while they decided how to respond. Pete Williams began broadcasting the prepared message to every corner of the galaxy. Earth's transmission used the Devourer's own communication network to reach civilizations that had been hiding for thousands of years. The message was simple but powerful. The age of silence was over, and the time of resistance had begun. Worlds that had been empty for centuries suddenly came alive with activity. Civilizations that had hidden underground or fled to distant stars heard Earth's call and began to answer. For the first time since the Devourers began their conquest campaign, multiple species started working together to fight back. The alien fleet found itself surrounded by enemies that appeared from nowhere and vanished before they could be attacked. Ship after ship reported contacts with impossible technology and weapons that seemed to bend the laws of reality. The Devourers had expected to find easy prey, but instead discovered their worst nightmare. Admiral Grace Turner emerged from the underground cities to command humanity's first open military operation in 5 years. She coordinated with alien allies who had answered Earth's call for resistance. Ships from dozens of species began arriving in human space ready to fight alongside the world that had broken the cycle of fear. The Devourers tried to retreat but found their escape routes blocked by the growing alliance. More species joined, the fight every day as news of the resistance spread across the galaxy. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable for millennia suddenly found themselves outnumbered and outmatched. Dr. Jake Morrison watched from the command center as his elderly body shook with emotion. The young captain who had discovered the Vorthak warning was now an old man who had lived to see the fulfillment of their sacrifice. The ancient race's final message had not only saved Earth, but had awakened the entire galaxy. The first battle between the Alliance and the Devourer fleet lasted for 3 days. Human ships fought alongside vessels from worlds whose names they could not pronounce. The aliens who had once seemed invincible were defeated by species working together for the first time in galactic history. Many Devourer ships were destroyed while others fled to distant parts of the galaxy. The survivors carried word that their ancient enemy had indeed returned and was more powerful than ever. Fear would now work against the creatures who had used it as a weapon for so long. Earth's surface was finally safe for human habitation. Children who had never seen sunlight emerged from the underground cities to explore a world they had only heard about in stories. Mary Johnson led her students on their first trip to see trees and grass and the blue sky that had seemed like fantasy. The quantum masking technology was shut down, and Earth's natural systems began to heal. Rivers flowed freely again, and forests grew back to their original green color. The planet that had appeared dead for 5 years came back to life in a celebration of renewal and hope. Sophie Green was honored as the architect of humanity's salvation, but she insisted that victory belonged to everyone who had remained silent during the long years underground. The courage to stay hidden when every instinct demanded action had been harder than any battle fought with weapons. The galaxy was forever changed by Earth's example. The Devourers still existed, but they no longer ruled through fear. Dozens of species had proven that working together could defeat any enemy. The silence that had protected Earth became a battle cry that echoed across the stars, inspiring others to find their own voice. Jake Morrison spent his final years helping to establish the Galactic Alliance with Earth as one of its founding members. The old explorer had lived to see humanity take its place among the stars not as conquerors, but as leaders who showed that sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when not to fight. The silence of Earth had indeed been louder than any war cry, and its echo would continue forever.